We're already here, transmitting. We're going to begin with the event. We are transmitting through the channels of Facebook Live and Anisha Cultural, through our YouTube channel, Anisha Cultural Uruguay. And we are welcoming you to this event. There is the launch and presentation of the Journal of Artistic Research, Yara. We have the honor that the board of Yara is here with us for this Iberoamerican launch. At this time, we are visualizing who will be with us for this presentation. Control, if you could show Michael Schwab and Mariela Yeregui and Yara Guasque. The main speakers. I am Delma Rodriguez from Anisha Cultural, Latin America and Europe in Uruguay. We are commencing this activity organized by by SAR, by Anisha Cultural in Uruguay, and supported by Red Clara, the Latin American network of academic communities, the Uruguayan Academic Network, Red Cudi in Mexico, RNP in Brazil, Renata in Colombia, the Colombian Academic Network, and especially I would like to thank the University of Valencia, which is where I am right now for an activity, for an academic activity. I thank the management of Ricardo Huerta of Artistic Education and Professor Amparo Alonso that have allowed us, have given us the infrastructure for us to present this. Before I begin, I would like to thank those who are behind the scenes in this event. In control, Red Cudi, Marta Ávila, Eduardo Romero, Enrique Córdoba, Julio Cardoso. At the Uruguayan Academic Network, Marcelo Parada. And at the Portuguese room, Fernando González. Thank you to our interpreters, coordinated by Professor Federico Brum and by Alejandra Faveiro. In English, we have Valentina Fernandez, Bruno Bendengo, Sofía Rivero, Andrea Troche, and in Portuguese, Catalina Capelletti. Thank you very much to all of them. We have thought a brief explanation and presentation on why this activity is being made in the framework of cultural activity and the motives why Anisha Cultural thinks this is important to diffuse this content. For that, we are going to begin with a brief explanation of the motives that Anisha Cultural and as you can see in the presentation, why we are organizing this along with Yara, why we are associating with them for this event. Anisha Cultural is a co-creation network of production and investigation in arts, science, technology, and society through art co-creation from a multicultural perspective and from a multidisciplinary perspective on arts. So this is why we think Yara is linked to us. We have several activities have taken place with us. You can see them in the map, the orange dots. since 2011 on a global level and a local level, such as the internet allows us. From the cultural standpoint, we have an endless images that show Anisha Cultural. On the right, there are activities on education with children in Uruguay and Peru, with artists such as Tom Gorman, specialized in scenic arts, an interactive performance in Uruguay, body painting with a cosmic piano in Mexico that provided sound from cosmic rays in real time. Some other activities such as Clemente Badin Pampas in Uruguay, or Dorit Chrysler from Austria, Brian Macker, a renowned multimedia Uruguayan artist, but also renowned in the world, and several other activities, as you can see on the left side. On top of the screen, linked to the Co-Creation Lab. That is our latest activity that has taken place in September, its first edition, regarding investigation and the intervention on co-creation in arts, science, and technology. This is a brief explanation of why these links are so rooted with Yara and with the production and investigation in art. Some of the meeting points that we specifically found with Yara were, first of all, Yara is an online journal, and our space in Anisha Cultural is the cyberspace, especially on internet as a means of work in networking, which Yara also is behind. Also, the opening of the content is for everybody, free for all, which allows a great expansion. This is another meeting point with Yara. And we also have an important line within research, which is a common ground. Arts, for us, at Anisha Cultural, is multidisciplinary, and from 2015 onwards, we have created intense work regarding multilingualism, which is a perspective that Yara is taking into account, and therefore in our presentation for Iberoamerica in Spanish and in Portuguese, it's also a common ground. This transmission is done in 3 languages. We usually do it like this since 2015. We have also done other activities in Quechua and Quichua, which are native languages of Latin America, important languages spoken by millions of people in our continent. That's why we understood that we thank Yara this possibility, which without a doubt will be beneficial for all of us. Latin American researchers, Iberoamerican researchers, in the possibilities of publishing and interacting and showing and evaluating things through the system that Yara provides. So I am closing this introduction on why it is so important for us that Yara participates with us. And now we will move on to our presentation in Spanish of Michael Schwab, who is in the English room. Before we move to the other room, if you allow me, please, I will introduce Michael. He is an artist and researcher who works with the post-conceptual uses of technology through different media. He is doing his PhD in photography at the Royal College of London. He is the creator and editor-in-chief at Yara, and we thank Michael for being here with us, because it shows this particular organization that takes place at Yara. I close the Spanish channel and I will let the English channel begin so that Michael may give his presentation. We will give him a few seconds to continue.
I'm wondering if I'm supposed to start. Can you hear me?
Michael, go ahead, welcome, and go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak, and for Alia Cultural to host this event, which is really exciting for us to do. I'm so sorry that I won't be able to speak in Spanish or Portuguese to you, so I hope that I can keep it as simple as possible for you to translate as well. JAR has been founded in 2011, so we've got quite a few years of activity. We have published 18 issues of peer-reviewed artistic research. To show you the website, I'm just going to switch to the one second. Other window, one moment. I have to, I'm very sorry, this is technically new to me. Okay. I hope you can see this now, which is the JAR website. Sorry for this glitch in the technology. So this is our website. We are a international online open access and peer-reviewed journal that disseminates artistic research from all disciplines. Until this year, we've only ever published and received submissions in English, but we've understood that those translation efforts by many researchers we are working with actually...
Michael,
yes?
sorry for the interruption. We are watching your desktop, but not exactly the Yara website.
Okay, what's happening?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm not quite sure why it doesn't do... You don't see the website? Okay. Can you see it now?
No, in this moment,
okay,
we are watching your folders.
How very strange. Okay, I try again. What do you see now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
I'm very sorry. I don't know what I did differently now.
It's no problem.
Anyway, so it's this is the website, and in a way, JAR has now started to receive submissions also in Spanish, Portuguese, and German. These are the first languages we've taken on to underline the fact that language, such as other media, is not something we simply feel can be used transparently in the process of communication of art. Crucial here are two sections. One is the journal itself. So if I click on the current issue link up here, you'll see what we have currently online. You can also see various submenus here that talk about our submission process, and we've just recently finished translating some of these, and you see the links there to translations. A second section we have is the network section, where we basically are publishing reflections, also in different languages, including others than Spanish, Portuguese, and German, as well as book review recently. So we are expanding what we are. The JAR was founded to really create a comparable journal publishing channel for artistic researchers to what's standard in the sciences. Very often people would tell us that they feel disadvantaged when it comes to funding applications, or they're disadvantaged when it comes to the mode in which they're allowed, or they were allowed to speak about their practice as research. So we conceived of JAR as a journal that would be media rich, that would allow artistic presentations, and for this we founded the Society for Artistic Research at the very beginning. They also have a website, which is this one, which is a transnational non-profit association that publishes JAR and also provides the research catalog, which is really our collaboration and publishing platform. The research catalog website is here. You may have seen that too. The JAR page is simply a, you might say, an empty metadata shell. All the submissions, when you read them on the screen, are hosted on the research catalog. And I'm going to show a little bit of this in a second. SAR also has annual conferences and an announcement service and other activities where SAR is trying in various channels to engage artistic researchers and also to problematize what's happening in the power structures within which artistic researchers are often meant to work, as well as to highlight the real contributions that are happening, which tend to be overlooked by our field as well, but in particular by neighboring fields and the sciences. I want to talk about three of the characteristics, of the key characteristics of JAR. One I mentioned already, which is the multimedia aspect and the research catalog. I just want to show you briefly how the design workspace looks like for people who are making submissions to us. So they would have uploaded some images. They would have, started a new exposition, we call them, and you would simply drag one of your images across, for example, or a video or an audio file. I'm just going to leave it like this. And then you can move this around on the screen, and you can say, I'm gonna add some text. Oops. Here, and so on. And then if I was to look at this in the viewer, that's how it looks like. So anything you see has been assembled by researchers themselves in this environment where they are moving media objects around and text around such that the constellation of this material is able to articulate what they're after in their work and what kind of knowledge contributions they are making. This mode of working flattens the hierarchy between image and text, which means that we don't require long text to be written. If people are able, using video, audio, photo collages, to convey how they work, there is no real requirement for long treatises. It can happen, and it does happen in JAR, but it is not necessary. The submission can be fully media-driven. Secondly, the peer review that sits on the back of this happens such that we ask reviewers whether what they're seeing in that submission is exposing practice as research, by which we mean that the idea of research that emerges from an artistic work becomes apparent. This may happen when, for example, a research question is being posed and answered. But if a submission does not pose a question, reviewers might still say, I require that question because otherwise I'm not understanding what's happening here. But they may also say, it's very clear, I don't need an explicit explanation of the question. I don't need contextualization of what's being put forward. I don't need a methodology, or I don't need a results section, and so on. Ultimately, if it's endorsed by the peer reviewers, JAR publishes research that may defy all criteria that you would normally apply to research and its publication in other fields. So we give the peer reviewers a really strong voice here. And you will see, if you go through JAR and its various contributions, that some more than others are able and willing to leave behind some of the more explanatory modes of working and writing. I mentioned exposition a few times already, and I wanted to show you this little diagram to explain a bit what I mean by that, because often practice is simply documented, which means practice is at the center of an activity, but documentation is somehow seen to be almost passive or after the fact. And very often we have a sense that the documentation doesn't really get into the details of the intellectual endeavor that is part of artistic practice. So we ask people to engage further with whatever documents they've created as part of their practice, which we call exposition, which would allow us to better understand maybe how something's made, or maybe how it sits in relation with other things, maybe what kind of associations are there. The strategies by which to do that are really open. But it's an effort to create what you may call a proactive form of documentation, through which practice can become much more tangible, exercised on the screen, if you will. And this is really what we review. We don't review the original practice, which is basically inaccessible for us outside of the internet. To show you an example, we've published this submission a couple of years ago, which also won the prize for the best research catalog exposition in, I think it was 2017. It's, you might say, a documentation of a performance done in Northern Ireland. And it's site-specific performance, and it uses this red line that is found on the squash court where this piece happened, and it also connects various blocks of text. I only really want to show you one image in that context. Look at this yourself independently, where you can see how the authors have used here this element of the performance itself, the documentation, and the continuation of that work, of the performance itself, in the space of the research catalog. So here you see the performers sticking tape on the wall, which is real-time filmed and projected, but it's also as if that line they're gluing on the wall of the space is continuing on the website itself, as if all these blocks of text and media they're putting forward is being connected by a red line that started to be put down at the side of the performance. And they use that device, this diagrammatic device, to convey this. This line, in a way, at the beginning is fairly linear. If you look at the biggest page we have of this, it's quite a complicated, different parts layout that has these subterranean connections between elements. And the idea is that this performance that you're going to read here is what you may call a repetition or an unfolding of an original performance, which is replaced and in some sense being extended, enriched by the possibilities that this format offers. And I know that the artists are continuing to work on this in ways, so that research project isn't really finished. It's an ongoing, you might say, unfolding of this kind of labor. And finally, I just want to show you a few of the what I call concerns at the moment that this kind of work has been thrown up, because we've had a lot of very different, very surprising engagement by researchers. And of course, we're also trying to make sense of what it is we are receiving. Clearly, we are showing work that is across various disciplines, but also connecting those disciplines in a manner that you may know from contemporary art in the widest sense. At the same time, there's a quality emerging from artistic research that doesn't really dovetail that well into the standard contemporary art discourse. And the list you see on the screen is the kind of qualities I think we should all be researching a bit. So how are works of research operating in a distributive environments? How are they moving across disciplinary boundaries? What's the particular quality of this move across disciplines, as well as media? What is the role of materiality, both in terms of the investment of a research project in a site, but also the materiality of the screen itself that's been used for the articulation of a piece of research? We've also seen how many of the artists we are showing are very specific about the work they do, and not having really claims about other more general topics. And this attitude of something that may not be transferable, something that is dedicated to its site, is quite crucial as well. And with the precision in which people are looking at what they've got at hand, a degree of complexity is reached that cannot easily be communicated and transferred, as I said, without adding further complications to it. So there is not a value-neutral mode of transmitting this. Any instance at which it's going to appear in a performance, on a wall, on a screen, will complicate and enrich whatever event it is people are working on. There's also an issue to do with what I'm here calling minor forms, which basically means that by and large, we don't have these big artistic gestures and big name artists. We have people who are often working on the fringes of art, of definitions of art. You may call them creative, you may call them still artistic, but they don't really fit that well in orthodox histories of art. Which I think is an interesting one. And of course, the degrees of collaboration, authorship, and divisions of labor that are being enacted in that context is also very different, despite the fact that being in a peer-reviewed journal, we do have a fairly restricted structure when it comes to authorship. It's not necessarily the case, but people tend to have this first author model very much in mind when they're approaching a journal. And finally, language itself. So it's not only about image and text, but it's also how a particular piece is written. You can write propositionally, you can write poetically, and language can modulate. And we have had a lot of people also using different languages at various moments, using multilinguality within their submissions. And we always found that difficult to deal with and review, depending on the language skills of the reviewers. But language itself isn't simply there to communicate. It's also a creative element in that context. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Maybe we can discuss some of these later on, but that would be a very quick introduction into JAR.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your presentation. We continue with the second part with Mariela introduction. And now we are changing and switch on with the other room in Spanish. Thank you so much, Michael.
That's okay.
Are you ready, Mariela? Mariela, we can hear you. You're only on audio. I am only on audio at the moment. Mariela was online at the beginning. We were on video on audio, but at the same time she had some network issues. So we are going to have her presentation in audio only. At least for now. I am with audio and I can see myself. Great. Do you share or should I share? You share. Mariela Yeregui. I will introduce her to continue giving. Mariela Yeregui is an electronic artist from Argentina. She's in Buenos Aires. Mariela has worked with different devices, net art, public spaces, different awards, prestigious in Argentina and abroad for her work. Mariela is also director at Master's Degree in Electronic Arts at the 3 de Febrero University in Argentina. Thank you very much, Mariela. We just listened to Michael Schwab, the editor-in-chief at Yara. And Mariela is a member of the board, and she is... Welcome, Mariela. You have already been at Anisha Cultural, so it's our pleasure to be with us, to be with you again.
Thank you, Delma. Well, before I start, I'm going to share my desktop later. Before that, I'm just going to be here via video and audio.
You just tell us.
Yeah, I think everything is okay on my side. So, to begin with, I would like to thank Delma and Anisha Cultural because they gave me this chance to show this that is involved to sharing this digital magazine that has to do with artistic, and it's expanding on a multilingual plane. And on this first step we have included Spanish, Portuguese and German. To begin with, I would like to briefly talk about and share with you some thoughts regarding the artistic investigation. So we know that for a long time, different disciplines have begun to intersect. Society is very specialized on the 20th century, so the dialogue between the different areas didn't touch too much. But I think that the different areas in art need to touch, and so we should open the dams that keep them separate. This problem doesn't only involve institutions and different channels used for it, but also people who are willing to move to the edges of their different areas. There has been a constant reversion on modernity. It's clear that there is a need to see dialogue and research and to rethink it in a wide area, because they should consider the different intersections. And for me, especially because I come from Latin America, it's very important that it occurs in a specific context. Regarding the lack of connection between the different areas, be it in the practice or in the theory, in actions or reflection, the issue of this intersection for us to have been acting on these areas of art, the issue is stimulating for us. And more than that, it's necessary to rethink this field from a local perspective. And I'm referring to this Latin American context that has so many spaces for this. Our interest is not only in speculation. It also could take a new space where artistic practice, educational practice could go outside this and could be taken in by a peripheric view and not in a condescending way. This way, from my perspective, to tear down the walls of a central knowledge and a dominant knowledge, so we could create new dynamics that take dialogue and context. It's something we must do. It's a process we must do. It's important to consider not only the action, to go beyond just action, but also to think about it, to reflect about this, and to look at it from a critical view, taking into account concept and dialogue, so we can take into account artistic practice and also the people who are doing things, who are acting upon knowledge and upon the objects. So I consider that to focus on this through a multidisciplinary look and to take into account the complexity, the multidimensionality, the lack of linearity, and the lack of a hierarchy of the knowledge above other knowledges. That's why I think that we should consider the issues that are related to this area of research, of creation, of reflection, and the creation of knowledge and artistic practices that come together. And so to reflect about how different disciplines interact with each other and how the artistic practice works in the area of reflection and research.
This should involve that the artistic practices should avoid any incorporation without credit and transcend the romantic vision that many times prevails. The intersection between art and investigation assumes the idea that we must think again about the paradigms, the traditional aesthetic paradigms, a revision of academic points of view and square views relating to art. This very clearly explains the overlap between art and research, and it involves a point of view relating various areas of knowledge, setting a work that encourages the transdisciplinary dynamics. During the process of conceptualizing this design and development of artistic projects, multiple knowledge mixed together. Many times people involved in these processes have very different aesthetic profiles regarding their academic and professional knowledge. This can make that the creative process can be really fruitful and diverse. From a dynamic of horizontal work regarding arts and research, we can find a free zone of exchange, molding the aesthetic universe of a particular work. Come to think of the formal architecture of the project, not only in its physical aspect, but also in the conceptual aspects, and thinking of what it implies from the point of view of the production of knowledge, going from the harder sciences to more social sciences, it's a condition of the possibilities that the work in itself allows for. Then the question would be, how can we mix the reflection and the artistic experimentation in an equal relationship? Is it possible to articulate the research, the experimentation and production, setting an open dialogue between different areas of knowledge? Is the field of art a box that allows this overlapping? Is it possible to think of a specific methodology? How can we make a system for researching artistic investigation, creating instruments that allow a relationship of balance between theory and practice? How can we show this in the local stage of Latin America? All these questions are open to various possible answers. All of them could show various possible strategies of action in constant change. What happens is that many times in our academic fields, which are very open to processes of investigation, artistic practices, save counted exceptions, it's thought of mostly of a path in traditional terms. Hypotheses, gathering information, contrasting the hypotheses, validating conclusions, etc. Within this view, this very square view, the work is forced to be questioned in the sense of moving forward, taking into account the knowledge that we have. The concepts have a positivist root that doesn't make anything rather than stunt the progress and the need of moving forward as essential factors in the research areas. Like this conceptual apparatus ends up being lacking. Many times we find that this conceptual apparatus is lacking, incomplete, and outdated. It's incomplete to describe these processes or to shape new processes regarding artistic practice research, to represent them, disseminate them, formalize them, or systematize them properly. Very different ideas from the ones we have now are needed and are very closely related, which allows us to use points of views that are maybe less legitimized in the academic circles, but more transgressive, relating to the hardly grounded and naturalized rules. So this is why it's very important for me to shape this artistic research and what it implies in our contexts. In this way, it's for me necessary to shape and conceptualize artistic research through critical thinking relating to artistic practices today
Within
local context in Latin America. In this search as an access for the conceptualization of artistic research, it is very hard in this sense not to link research practices to epistemological framework that make it possible for modern science to exist. But as we are reminded by post-colonialism theorists, there is no modernity without coloniality, for which many of the practices should question and articulate a critical standpoint from their own point of the Latin American context, and that can question the work here would be to rethink those points of view strongly biased by Euro or Western points of view in light of the processes that walk away from these paradigms. In this way, we can set different paths of what we are right now with
If you could move a bit slower because the interpreters cannot keep up.
From this overlap of the practices, the idea is that these practices can become more critical of themselves. What I'm interested in is to put the focus on the need of bringing to the forefront that breaks with established paradigms. These practices that can put at play a certain set of phenomena in the overlap between art and research, and that seem to suggest that it's possible to walk a different path than the established one. To me, to revise the concept of modernity from a non-Western centered perspective, it is to me the first step. Because if there's something underlying in the fact of inspecting these epistemological structures, is to critically rethink certain preconceptions of modernity. And in this case, those that lead to a certain way of doing research. This is, lastly, to tear apart the idea of truth and false spoke of by Foucault, something that not only goes through margins of the discourse, but also has a high gravitational power. And now to summing up, I would like to show an example that I find very interesting. To wrap up, I would like to question myself, to wonder, can we say that this kind of practices can make processes of artistic research? In my view, they can. They are triggers for thought. They're triggers of processes of articulating the practice and theory. This premise is so important. It makes it so important, the object as well as the theory that gives the object value. This is not a specific knowledge, but can show the disciplinary character of artistic research. In this sense, JAR is a space of multiple methodologies where the idea is to show an alternative view to what this knowledge very square institutions are saying. On the other hand, this incorporation of various languages allows us, Spanish speakers, many of us living within Latin American context, to think from a post-colonial standpoint how to transcend this self-confinement between the limits of a formal subcategory neutrality. This is why, to me, it is vital to show the bias of the epistemic bill hiding behind its hegemonic discourse, and to question the preconceptions over which the discourse of knowledge is built on. This means to raise your voice, so to unmask this illusion of a modernity which hides in the shadows of thought. From this point, it is necessary to think and to create networks, to create autonomous thought like Jaris, where different ways of thinking can be incorporated and they account for alternative ways of thinking. What I would like to close up, kind of, is to highlight somehow what JAR allows us as an alternative way to communicate our practices of artistic research is something that within JAR, they're not called papers or articles, but exhibits. And this, to me, is very important. But in this format of exhibit, languages, different languages and the different mediums are shown as equal. I'm going to show now. There we go. I think you can see it now. Yes? Can you see it?
We are looking at your desktop. Yeah.
There we go. For example, this is one of the many exhibits that I'm working in within the magazine. This is a work called Palestinian Wildlife Series, where she wonders the leading question of this exhibit: how can post-human and post-colonial aspects be faced, contrasted with the animal condition, when the animal condition of certain humans is their natural state. In this exhibit, we can see that it doesn't have a linear view. One of the possibilities of the top menu of JAR, it's a little bit hidden. Just hovering over with the cursor, we can see the different contents, but also the navigation within the website. the idea of this is to kind of be able to expand the screen or what we see in the screen. And in this case, this work by this author, this Palestinian author, allows us to see a first image of the content in a very unorthodox way, if we consider what the most common academic formats are. We can move using this navigation tool, where we can move horizontally and see the different contents. In this case, text and images, but we could also see some of the other contents where there's images and videos, and all of this, the author in this case has worked from the platform Research Catalog, just as Michael showed a little bit ago. And the interesting thing is that it gives us the possibility to see the content and work with it in a non-hierarchical way. And the idea is that these contents can be sent to Yara. This is very interesting because it's a way of organizing a theoretical framework from a very visual way. The different theoretical contributions can be organized in a very visual way. I invite you to look for the articles. There's a very explicit use of the scrolling, the horizontal scrolling within the website. With this idea that the format of the exhibit is just as important as the content itself. To wrap up, what I invite is for everyone to think how we can create exhibits in our own linguistic, social, and cultural context. This question should work as an invitation to trigger a discussion from your own contributions and thoughts, knowing that this discussion in Spanish and Portuguese is an open room, an open space to trigger this critical standpoint from a non-Western point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariela. I am sure many of those who are connected right now would like to know more in order to submit and generate such spaces of exposition that are provided by Yara and that you were so very well describing. Before we move to our Portuguese chat and Yara Guasque, I will introduce Yara. Yara Guasque is an independent artist and researcher. She was an associate professor of the Visual Arts program of the postgraduate Visual Arts program at the University of Santa Catarina in Brazil. Yara holds, she's retired as a professor, but she has had a great path in that university. Furthermore, Yara has a doctorate in communication and semiotic communication from the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, and also has a postdoctorate degree. Thank you very much, Yara. We are going to switch languages, so we will be with you in a moment.
ya fue.
I have a doctorate in semiotics on telepresence. We worked on 2 groups. Performing in Sao Paulo and Florianopolis. I would also thank Michael's invitation for the exposition of my colleague in Spanish and Portuguese, Mariela Yeregui. It's a shame that Manuel, who was also with us, cannot be with us here today. And I would also like to thank those who are listening to us and who are with us. I will talk a little about my trajectory in Yara.
I have been following Yara since its 10th edition, so that adds up to 8 editions since I started. The idea was to incorporate communications in different languages, and for us it was very clear that that language had to be Spanish. In 2019, Yara decided to open the Spanish-Portuguese panel. Because we understood that many of the people who participate in this project don't understand either Spanish or Portuguese, and at the same time the German panel was opened. In the first place, we thought, along with some Spanish colleagues, and as well as Mariela Yeregui and Manuel Ángel Macía and myself,
in Argentina. So us 3, we are the ones from America. This made us begin discussing about metrics this year in March, when there was a conference on SAR, the Society for Artistic Research in Zurich. In the final debate, the people that were listening said that the participation in conferences of SAR, of authors that weren't from Europe or North America, was very little. The same year, SAR had proposed presenting other cultural contexts about artistic research, because the concept of artistic research implies a certain legitimation in research, which does not follow the same guidelines. Although Levi-Strauss would maybe disuse. I believe
from the sky. In the quotes, it says that one of the relationships from the fall from heaven. They said that art would be the last wild refuge in our society. Independently from the word wild, which talks about underdeveloped countries, which is the most important thing. It talks about non-accumulative ideas. To talk about the nature of those civilizations who don't follow the predetermined models, using a dichotomy between the field of art and science. In this way, it is bigger than the self-mentioned artistic interaction. The artistic interaction implies the scientific method, and this scientific method has a different point of view. This coming from a different part of the text that comes from Yara, which talks about the high education institutes for doctorate and magistrate. There are different considerations for these studies, and in Brazil, starting from the 70s, there's been a different way. And in Brazil, there has been a different kind of analysis for more than 30 years, with the difference of North and South hemispheres, that we do not know each other very well. We also don't know much of our story in this trajectory. And maybe we are not very acquainted for the ways of creating knowledge as they would on the North Hemisphere, we would do on the South American universities. For example, would our system be used for a reproduction of concepts created out of our cultural background and to be able to create our own concepts? We have a reality which needs to be revised and investigated. What I would like to bring today forth is the concept of ideas, how Eduardo Viveros Castro said, a writer who I've been reading a lot lately, has a book called Metaphysical Cannibals. It has this sentence: the very idea of identification is an analyst idea. An animist spirit or a naturalist brain would probably have different ideas. These indigenous societies have different ideas. And I think the book of medieval metaphysics talks about our hemisphere, studying an indigenous culture. At the moment, the people question can be analyzed because those peoples This talks about the difficult way, and it relates the idea of art with the Society of Brazil and the Société Française in 1919. Most schools of arts have, for example, visual arts and not fine arts, but it kept that name, fine arts, even though. In these conferences, we will keep hearing that the idea of art. So, in the question of Spanish and Portuguese, and our colleagues Mariela and Michael saying that Portuguese is the language of the conquistador. And in that way we could have many other languages. Some universities in that sense have tried very hard to bring those languages into our universities. The problem with translation is something that has to be taken into account. For example, in Metafísicas Canibais by Eduardo Viveiros de Castros is a very complex book written in Portuguese. Even though it has good notes, that book was published in French, then translated into English, and has recently been translated and published in Portuguese. It's a very important thinker who talks about anthropophagia, a post-structural anthropophagia, talks about the idea of structuralisms and the movement of the monstrous alliance of counter-nature, thinking about risking being in the world of the object and making internal debates, and the tautology of research practices emerge when the object does not coincide with the cultural context of the subject, who does not bring any new light but the affirmation of pre-existing ideologies. For that reason, he raises the question of perspectivism, of these naturalisms, or of the supernatural. And was a views on the use of medicinal wild plants, and that use made for the plants as treatment and altered states of consciousness. Therefore, we cannot speak about a distance between culture and nature. Yara himself, treating submissions as expositions, or discussing the character of expositionality emphasized by Michael Schwab, does not find an easy transposition into Portuguese, and its translation is very difficult because in Portuguese we have the word exibição, mostrar and exposição. The word exibição, in addition to its meaning of visual strategy of representation and translation of visualities, has also been very joined into the context and linked to the idea of exhibition as a reaffirmation of a stereotype and the materialization of the exhibition. Therefore, mixing these figures of indigenous people exposed in the Jardin Zoologique d'Acclimation in Paris in the 19th century, exposed as an attraction and entertainment to show the idea of primitive and regressive cultures. The Yara, therefore, is a multimedia platform and accepts various multimedia platforms, videos, fixed images, moving images, audio, which let me try to translate the character of expositionality that Michael Schwab always refers to. This expositionality concept can be shown in a very known artwork I know. But this expositionality meaning affects the process of thinking about the materialization of an exhibition in physical space. And of course, here I am talking about a text that is not only a text indicative and argumentative writing, but any other visual, artistic, sound text as well. This is why we talk about some of the materials we don't have access to right now. So we're talking about a text which not only talks about argumentative writing, but it's any other visual, artistic, and sound text. So my question is, why do I have to abandon my own language to talk about my research? As a Spanish and Portuguese panels, we discuss in the group the issue of decolonization. But I would like to talk more about terms. In this, not talking about resistant cultures, talk about new ideologies. We need to dig deeper and deeper into those new energies. Talking about this, our own languages in Spanish and Portuguese, bringing that European and Latin American concept, and not talk about those decentralized contexts. Therefore, multiplying the point of view, interacting with the unknown. Just to sum up, I would like to say that we're talking about the Portuguese and Spanish panel, and also German. But us, as Latin Americans, we recognize the difference in cultural contexts. This will have to be dismembered, because the more we dig deeper, the more difference we'll find. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yara. I don't know if you have any questions. We're going to open the chat for questions. I don't know if anybody in the Portuguese chat room would like to ask anything in Portuguese. We're going to move on now. We're moving to the Spanish chat room. Could you please enable the Spanish channel?
Necesito.
We are in the Spanish channel. We have enabled the different audio outputs to allow you to ask questions. On this channel, Mariela will be able to answer in Spanish, and then we can move to the English channel so that Michael can also answer. Should there be no questions in written form? If anybody wants to ask via microphone for Michael. María Laura Cabrera will ask a question for Yara. I would like to read some of the articles that she mentions. I'm not yet familiar with Yara. The final part I didn't understand, Maria Laura. If you're not familiarized with Yara, what you mean by that? She's saying she's not familiar with Yara yet, and if you could recommend her some articles so that she can get acquainted with their journal. Anybody else? For example, is there a date in particular to keep in mind so as to be able to look at the web, or do the articles just are sent to the journal? These are some of the possible questions. We are going to enable the microphone for Yara. Anybody else wants to ask questions? We have Paula Bergelet, Maria Francisca Montes, Maria Laura, who has already asked, Antonio Salín Garcia from Colombia, Alba González from the University of Barcelona, Álvaro Herrera from Colombia, Universidad del Valle, Sensor Lab from Colombia. If you have any questions, you can write it down, and if you would like to ask them orally, you can tell us so we can enable your mics. Mariela, if you would like to make some contributions regarding something you thought was missing, maybe, to wrap up the presentation. I am looking that someone is writing down, but the question is not finished yet. Sorry, Mariela, your microphone was not enabled. Am I enabled? Yes, go ahead. At the Yara page, you will see the open calls. The collaborators and the people who want to collaborate and send their expositions may work on them in the research catalog, and once it's ready you can send them, and this will be subject to a project of revision, and after that your exposition may become a number at our jar issue, which was something you asked, Delma. Maria Laura was saying that she was not familiar with the web, and she just entered and she thinks it's very interesting. She's learning to work with it. It's a very important comment because Yara is providing us a new way to access content. Antonio, I will make another comment from Antonio from the Pamplona University in Colombia. He asked if the magazine is in any sort of indexed database. Yes, it is. Michael has a better idea of what the database is like. Honestly, I don't remember it, so I will give him the word. We finish with the Spanish channel and then we move on to Michael so that he may answer such questions. And in a minute. Paula Vergelet from Buenos Aires says she really liked the Yara design. Anything else? Antonio Saling, thanks for your answer. Anybody else from the Spanish channel so that we may move on to Michael's questions? I'm sorry, answers that may provide Michael from the English channel.
Am I online now?
We are talking in English channel.
Estamos hablando en el canal de español.
Okay, so it's me then. Can you hear me?
Yes, Michael, go ahead, please.
Great. I never know. There was this one question to do with the indices, and we are not quite finished in applying to the standard Web of Science indices and so on. But we are already on the European Research in Humanities Index as well as Crossref. Unfortunately, we are not yet, or might not be listed in the directory of open access journals due to special copyright implications there is. So that's a bit of an issue there. But we are working hard in getting JAR recognized in those more scientific indices. Also, the level 2 index of the Norwegian list is something we've just been applying for. The problem is in any of these that there is no clearly defined field of artistic research, which means when you are looking at the quality of your journal and how it's rated, we find it difficult to even indicate who we are comparing with. And so we are a little bit at the mercy of those assessors who are deciding where we're going to sit. But all the relevant bits are in place now, and I hope that we're gonna be listed in the more important indices soon. It's also maybe something I should say that within the northern European context, those kinds of listings really weren't mentioned as being very important to people. So we didn't really focus that much on it the first years. It's in particular in the Spanish, but also through those extensions to other countries across the globe, where we realize how important for researchers the inclusion in JAR in those indices is. It's quite an interesting situation where the development of artistic research in Northern Europe has somehow operated in a way where impact factors and journal articles and so on are not that relevant in comparison to, for example, research funding people give or receive. So it's an interesting situation what the economic background of artistic researchers is across the globe. There's a question coming in how you can subscribe to JAR. Maybe I should say that JAR itself is open access and free to submit, as well as free to read. So virtually, you simply have to go to jar-online.net and read the issue. You can register for a free account on the research catalog, which, as I said, SAR, the society, provides free of charge, and upload your content, create the exposition, and then we're going to receive it and get in touch to discuss the submission with you, find reviewers, and ultimately, all going well, publish it in one of our forthcoming issues. So there's no subscription required. There's no financial transaction necessary.
Thank you, Michael. Do you want to add some comment or wrap up the session?
Yes, I mean, I would
comment?
Yes, I can do this. I mean, I'm really happy that we've done this, and also to hear differently what Mariela and Yara's emphases are, because in a way, it illustrates the complexity of the situation, and each of us is coming into that problem, which is an aesthetic problem, it's an epistemological problem, and it's a political problem, differently with these different perspectives. So JAR itself, the way it's designed, is a vessel that says we don't need these external hierarchies to start a discussion about qualities and relationships within materials, but we will have a dynamic relationship that is never fully, in control of, for example, a reader. What are they going to read and how? Nor are we fully in control of our own work, because it has its own dynamics as you start putting it onto a page, or as you start dancing it on stage, or as you start, hanging pictures in a space. So we are dealing with a fragile network that extends to a editorial board and reviewers who write quite extensive feedback. We often have situations where artists, even when they get a negative outcome, are really happy about people having started to engage with their research. But we sometimes have substantial feedback we give. Just now was the longest I get. I just sent to an artist of 40 pages of commentary. It's really incredible how, when you start engaging with those deep levels of meaning making, and if you get reviewers who take that seriously, you actually start creating an understanding that is not simply a communication, but it's something that is unfolding and affecting people all sorts of levels. And all of that we wrap into a review process, and it's working quite successfully, I must say. So ultimately, an author, I think, as was described, being aware of the complexities and the pitfalls of this kind of context, will have to find in their practice resources to address a particular approach to their world and to sharing understanding they're developing in their world with a world of which they cannot assume to know enough. And it's quite a delicate balancing act, but it's really productive when you start reading in detail in what we've published. And I very often hear this, that the moment somebody reads a piece and follows it and gives it time, they're surprised how productive. It's so not an easy format, not a quick format, but actually something that is becoming valuable as a tool for research and not only for communication, I would say. And I hope that came across in the various contributions that we had. And I would really hope that even if you find it all a bit daunting or maybe not that clear, if you start to engage, there's a big team across the globe now available to help you along. So I would say, have a look what we have, give it a shot. And if you're unhappy, let us know, because we will have to learn how to talk with people about what it is we're doing.
Thank you, Michael. We are switch on with the other room in English, in Spanish room for finish the session. Thank you so much.
Spanish channel. May we switch, please, to the Spanish channel? We take this opportunity to make the general closing event with Mariela, Yara, and Michael. If you could also answer some of the questions that were asked in the Portuguese channel, you may answer them here. Michael's closing speech was very interesting because he gave us the possibility to create new paths regarding Yara's publications, and I believe this, Mariela, if you may, we will continue with your final comments and then with Yara's, and then we will finish. I would just like to go back to some of the questions. I believe, what did I mean when I talk about non-orthodox methodologies? I think it's very hard to define them. It's a very dynamic process that is related to the methodology itself. What I would like to say at last, and why I was so interested at the moment to join CHAR, we were exploring these possibilities to transcend this logocentrism, where textuality is dominant, is very strong, and ends up killing or silencing something that happens in the very own artistic processes, which are in their own research processes. So I believe Yara is a space very fertile in order to continue questioning these methodologies. Now, from our sociocultural, geographical, and linguistic background, It gives us the possibility to rethink all this, and from a very distant place and or on the outside, what certain propositions academic. So this is what I mean when I speak about non-orthodox methodologies. I don't think I could define them. This is something we need to think about, and the exhibits and contributions of potential authors in Spanish and Portuguese, because I am talking out from our panel, which Yara and I are part of. I believe is a very rich space of artistic research, but from the standpoint, if you will. Now closing, thank you for all of you for your attention, and we await you at Yara. We hope you submit your contributions on the webpage of the journal. We have shown you our email in case you need any sort of guidance. We are very willing to help you. I would like to clarify to all those listening that those who registered for the event were shared to Yara, so that you may contact them directly, because we believe there is a big interest of keeping in touch with Yara. So we believe you will be receiving information about them. Yara, if you will. I wrote down the questions about Maria Laura Cabrera, about files. I spoke about a book about Eduardo. I gave you all the data about the book.
Pongo todas esas citas en las publicaciones, y para cerrar querría decir que the publications that I made are dealing with the issue of translation as a form of written protest, and everything that's happened. This is to show how translations can also be problematic, but that's it. That's what I would like to say as wrapping up my presentation. And I would like to highlight what Mariela said about how people are slowly getting more interested in getting to know the space that JAR allows for. And thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to those who enrolled, more than 60 people from pretty much all over Latin America, several European countries, the United States, well, you know, several other places. So we thank you. We are still receiving the greetings for the board of Yara. It has been an honor for us to take place in this activity. We hope to continue generating instances of collaboration with Yara and Anisha Cultural in Latin America and Europe, in Uruguay. We wish you the greatest of success in your new stage, in such creative stage, from the standpoint of publishing possibilities for art researchers. So I believe there's a whole field to be explored, as the board expressed, a field that is opening in publications. So congratulations. I hope you do really well in this new stage, and hope you may open many new lines of art and innovative formats within Yara. So, with a final greeting for all of you, we will be finishing this presentation and first session with Yara. We thank Mariela Yeregui, Yara Guasque, Michael Schwab for being here with us today, and we thank everybody else for the interest. We have moved a few minutes past our scheduled time, so we will close now. We thank all of those who participated, and we will be keeping in touch. We may open the microphones for all of you. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All mics are open.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. We'll be in touch, I'm sure.